Ever since that infamous moment when it was announced at E3 2019 that the National Dex wouldn't be in Pokemon Sword and Shield, and subsequent gameplay footage turned out to be quite underwhelming, many fans, myself included, have tried to advance theories as to what exactly went wrong in the development process of these games. From mobile games becoming a heavier focus of the Pokemon Company, to Game Freak's priority moving to side games that it was developing simultaneously with Sword and Shield, to strenuous deadlines to match the generational progression of all other aspects of the Pokemon Company such as the anime and merchandise, it seems that the reason for this lack in quality is certainly multifaceted. However, one new theory has emerged that's quite different from all the rest, and that's because unlike looking at the actions of the Pokemon Company or its constituent companies such as Game Freak, it instead attributes blame to the fans themselves. Now, in my opinion, part of this theory isn't entirely off base, but the way that it's construed and the conclusion that is drawn from it definitely is. I found this to be a really interesting one to dissect, so without any further ado, let's get into it and see what these people have to say. The crux of this theory has to do with the fans' reception to past Pokemon game releases, both in terms of sales and popular opinion. It operates on the assumption that fan reception to one game can determine how subsequent Pokemon games are approached from the developer's perspective, which I don't think is an unreasonable claim in itself. In particular, this theory looks at the fans' reception to the Generation 5 games, Black and White, and their sequels, Black 2 and White 2. Now, there is a second premise that one has to accept in order to continue to understand this theory, and that is that there was a general decline in the main series game's quality since the start of Generation 6 with X and Y. Now, having been so involved in Pokemon and the community since 1998, having had thousands of interactions with fans, hosted polls that have received tens of thousands of votes, and received tens of thousands of comments on similar topics, I can tell you from my experience that this does indeed seem to be the popular opinion. Compared to the likes of games like Emerald, Platinum, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Black 2 and White 2, etc., games like X and Y, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, Let's Go, and Sword and Shield just don't seem to hold up comparatively. And despite the fact that not everyone will agree, I think there's quite a broad consensus that this is indeed the case. From this, you can perhaps see where this theory is leading us. According to this theory, the fan reception to Generation 5's games caused a decline in quality of the Pokemon main series. But how could this be the case? Well, when Black and White first released, there was actually significant backlash. The games were intended to be a sort of reboot for the series, but generally they were perceived to be too much of a change, especially with the 156 Gen 5 Pokemon being the only Pokemon available in the Unova region until you beat the game, and are only then able to transfer other Pokemon in. Not to mention the fact that there was significant uproar regarding many of the design choices for the Pokemon themselves. Because of this, Black 2 and White 2 weren't fully appreciated at the time either, despite undoubtedly being the greatest upgraded versions of the previous games, which, in fact, they were actually full-fledged sequels with numerous new areas, new characters and new gym leaders, a fantastic story, more Pokemon available, new post-game activities such as the Pokemon World Tournament, challenge mode to make the game harder, etc. I'll be the first to admit that back in the Gen 5 era, I was one of those fans who didn't appreciate these games fully for what they were, and it was only upon replaying them later that I realized just how amazing they are and the sheer effort that was put into them. And it definitely appears that I'm not the only one with this changed mindset. I hosted a poll last year asking what people thought was the best Pokemon game of all time. And out of a quite large sample size of nearly 40,000 randomly selected voters, insofar as they were not selected from any game-centric source, Black 2 and White 2 were voted as the second best main series Pokemon games of all time after Heart Gold and Soul Silver, despite the immense backlash that Gen 5 initially faced. Not only was this backlash very intense, but the Gen 5 sales weren't great either. Out of every single new generation pair of games, Black and White are the worst selling ones of all time. The very worst. Black 2 and White 2, despite having two versions, only sold 25% better than the worst selling main series Pokemon game of all time, Pokemon Crystal, and was outsold by Yellow and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, barely upgraded versions of their predecessors, and was vastly outsold by every single remake ever released. So this is what the theory advances, that Pokemon fans don't appreciate when Game Freak actually invests a huge amount of effort into the games, and that this is reflected both in the popular opinion of the games and in their sales numbers. Now, I will admit that sales numbers definitely don't reflect the quality of the games. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon beating Black 2 and White 2 is absurd in my opinion, and Let's Go, a shallow remake of Kanto with only 2 new Pokemon, only 153 total available Pokemon, and basically the same map and story. As of a year ago, it had beaten Crystal Emerald, Platinum, Black 2 and White 2, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, and is likely to have beaten even more since, including Fire Red and Leaf Green, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and perhaps even more. Furthermore, despite having the biggest controversy and criticism in Pokemon history, Sword and Shield sold over 16 million copies in its first 6 weeks, making it the fastest selling Nintendo Switch game of all time. All of this I will accept. In general, the Pokemon fanbase does not seem to purchase the games based on their quality or the amount of effort put into them. However, I think this theory takes it one step too far when they blame the fans for the quality of the recent games based on this trend. The key point that these theorists need to recognize is that fans purchasing a game does not mean that they're endorsing that game. After all, it is only after purchasing and playing through the game in its entirety that one can get a full sense of its quality, despite some limited knowledge of what the game might include and exclude from announcements and trailers and whatnot. A good example of this would be knowing that over half the Pokemon are missing, seeing numerous graphical problems and glitches in trailers and pre-release gameplay, etc. After all, it is possible, however improbable, that the rest of the game could be so amazing as to make up for the bad things that one sees before playing the games themselves. So they might go ahead and buy it, and in fact, fans were kind of led into thinking this with Sword and Shield, since excuses of working on the rest of the game were used as to why these negative things were there in the first place. Sales should not be used by an already massive gaming franchise like Pokemon as a metric for the quality of their games, or even how much fans like them. Oftentimes, they're just a reflection of how popular a given Nintendo console is, the fact that certain games are merely upgraded versions or sequels, successful marketing, etc. With the size of the franchise too, it's inevitable that every single main series game will sell well relative to any other franchise. Even the worst selling Pokemon game sold 6.4 million copies. The main point here is that a game selling well should not be a positive reinforcement to continue making lower quality games, as is especially the case with Sword and Shield on the hugely popular Switch console. Having not played the game, fans are instead relying on the Pokemon brand itself to deliver high quality and thoroughly developed games as it had once done in the past, and are hoping that their past experiences with the games will match those of the present, or will even be exceeded. Even if we were to take this theory at face value, it would not mean that the fans have caused the games to be low quality, since the fans are of course not the ones making the games after all. Instead, it would mean that Game Freak and the Pokemon Company are aware that Pokemon games will sell regardless of quality, and are therefore taking shortcuts and not putting in their full effort as they used to, or are at least not dedicating enough people and or resources towards the game's development. A Pokemon game is so much more than the number of units sold. It's the lasting impact that it has on the lives of fans, the emotional experience they have while playing it, the fun that they have, and the duration of that fun, and the memories it creates. A rushed game limits the experience severely, and despite maybe selling well, the negative impact is felt by the collective, as shown by user review scores and general reception to Sword and Shield, for instance, despite selling incredibly well. Yes, the 5th generation does present a rare instance of immense effort being put into a series of games, and those games not being immediately appreciated by fans as much as they should have been. I could maybe see this leading to a lack of motivation, at least temporarily, but this does not excuse what has been happening over the past 7 years, and at least 4 game releases that are demonstrably lower quality. Even if this were the case, what sense does it make to repeat what fans initially disliked about Gen 5? The initial limitations on the Pokédex that fix themselves entirely once the player beats the games, and make it way worse than Sword and Shield with no access to half of all Pokemon as was initially intended. This theory just does not seem to fly, and blaming the fans themselves is one step way too far. A lot of the premises hold true, but the conclusion that is drawn is a classic demonstration of logical overreach. Although it is admittedly a much different scenario, the best analogy I can think of would be a car manufacturer releasing a great model of a car, it not selling amazingly well and people not fully appreciating it, so the manufacturer cuts features and makes lower quality cars for all future models for the foreseeable future. Even in the rare cases where customers don't know what features are missing, people who purchase those models will have a less enjoyable time with their car than they would have if the good quality had been maintained. Similarly, in the gaming world, giving the fans less content and lesser quality content is something that they know no fans of any game developer would want, and doing just that is a reflection of that developer's culpability in the situation, not of the fans themselves. Well, thank you all for watching this video. I hope you found it insightful, and if you have any thoughts, be sure to leave them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to leave a like, share it with your friends on social media, and subscribe with notifications on for more Pokemon content. If you like what I do on this channel, feel free to check out my Patreon where you can support my content and get access to cool perks. Otherwise, feel free to check out some of my other videos appearing on your screen now. This has been Silph Spectre, and I'll see you guys next time for another Pokemon video.